She was not the kind of woman who wanted the spotlight. In fact, she preferred to stay in the background, quietly making sure things worked the way they should. Her name was Sarah, and by the time she was 23, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most dependable employees in her city. Dependable, but not ambitious in the flashy sense. She didn't chase titles or status. Instead, she chased reliability, commitment, and the feeling of being useful. Those qualities she believed were worth more than applause. When she first joined the small company, it was nothing more than a struggling business tucked inside a modest office building. The firm had been around for a few years, but its survival was always uncertain. Bills piled up, clients walked away, and new competitors appeared almost every month. Many of her friends asked why she even took the job. After all, she was talented, had good grades, and had offers from larger, stable organizations. But there was something about this place that drew her in. Perhaps it was the challenge. Or maybe it was the way her boss, Mr. Khalid, had spoken during the interview. His voice filled with conviction about how the company could someday grow into something meaningful. Sarah admired conviction. She thought, maybe he just needs someone who won't give up on him. Someone who will stand by him until the vision becomes real, and so she stayed. The first few years were not easy. She worked 12-hour days without complaint. She picked up responsibilities that weren't even hers: bookkeeping, client follow-ups, late-night presentations. She even cleaned the office on weekends when the janitor left because the salary was delayed. When others resigned, she stayed. When Khalid lost patience and considered shutting everything down, she encouraged him to keep going. She believed that one day, their sacrifices would be rewarded, and the company would rise. Her friends didn't understand. "Sarah," they would say, "you're wasting your life in that sinking ship. You're talented enough to be somewhere better, earning 3 times more. Why are you doing this to yourself?" But Sarah would smile quietly and answer, "Because loyalty means something. Because when I commit, I don't walk away halfway." That loyalty defined her. And in the early days, Khalid appreciated it. He would often tell her, "You're not just my employee, Sarah. You're the backbone of this company." Those words carried weight. They made the late nights and the missed family dinners feel worthwhile. Years rolled on, and slowly, the tides began to turn. The company won its first big contract, thanks in large part to Sarah's meticulous preparation. Then another client signed on. Revenue started to trickle in more steadily. With each small victory, Khalid's confidence grew, and the business gained recognition. Eventually, what was once a fragile firm began to take shape as a respected player in the market. But growth came with its own complications. New investors stepped in. The company expanded, hiring more staff, upgrading its office, and adopting a more polished image. With that polish came a subtle but undeniable shift in Khalid's behavior. He became more conscious of appearances, more hungry for status, more protective of his image. The humble man who once thanked Sarah for her dedication slowly transformed into someone less approachable, more calculating. Still, Sarah did not complain. She had given too much to this company to step away now. She had turned down other opportunities, jobs that would have paid more, offered better benefits, and even given her a clearer career path. But she told herself, "This is my path. I built something here, and I want to see it through." What she didn't realize was that loyalty is often invisible to those who are blinded by ambition. By the 7th year, the company was thriving. The board praised Khalid for his visionary leadership, and industry magazines began publishing articles about his success. Sarah's name was rarely mentioned. She didn't expect it to be, at least not publicly. Recognition was never her driving force, but she did expect a certain kind of private acknowledgement, perhaps a promotion, a raise, or even a heartfelt thank you. Something that showed her boss remembered the sacrifices she had made when no one else believed in him. Instead, she noticed something else: a growing distance. Khalid stopped involving her in big decisions. He downplayed her contributions in meetings, and worst of all, he began to treat her not as the trusted right hand she had always been, but as a liability to be managed. The change was subtle at first, and Sarah, ever patient, brushed it aside. She told herself he was under stress, or perhaps just distracted by the new responsibilities that came with expansion. But the truth revealed itself soon enough, and it struck her harder than she ever imagined. One morning, she was called into Khalid's office. His expression was grave and his tone unusually cold. He said the board had raised concerns about irregularities in the financial reports. Funds had been misallocated, numbers didn't add up, and the blame, he explained, pointed in her direction. Sarah was stunned. She had handled finances before, yes, but always with transparency. She had records, spreadsheets, receipts, all neatly organized. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Khalid cut her off. "I trusted you, Sarah. If you've been careless, or worse, dishonest, I can't protect you. The board is furious. They want answers, and they want accountability." The words didn't make sense. Dishonest? Careless? She had built her reputation on being the exact opposite. She tried to speak again, but his tone hardened. "For the sake of the company's future, it's better if you resign quietly. I'll make sure this doesn't go public, but you need to leave. Today." The room spun. Her years of sacrifice, her late nights, her unwavering loyalty, reduced to an accusation. And not just any accusation, but one that struck at the very core of who she was. She walked out of the office in silence, her mind numb. Colleagues glanced at her curiously, whispering in corners. Some looked at her with suspicion, others with pity. In a single morning, her identity within the company had shifted from backbone to outcast. That night, sitting alone in her small apartment, Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about the past 7 years. All the choices she had made, all the opportunities she had turned down, all the loyalty she had given. It suddenly looked like a mistake. She had built her entire life around a company that now wanted her erased. She could have screamed. She could have marched back into Khalid's office and demanded justice. But Sarah was not that kind of person. Anger had never been her way. Instead, she chose something far more powerful: calm. Her calm was not weakness. It was clarity. She decided that if Khalid wanted her gone, then fine, she would leave. But she would not leave as the scapegoat for his betrayal. She would not let him rewrite the story of who she was and what she had given. So, with the same quiet patience that had carried her through long years of sacrifice, Sarah began to plan. She gathered her old files, her records, her emails, her receipts, every late-night presentation she had prepared, every budget she had balanced, every client she had secured. It was all there, neatly archived. She realized she had something stronger than anger. She had proof. And proof, handled calmly, could be sharper than revenge shouted in rage. This was only the beginning. Sarah's days after leaving the company were heavy with silence. She had no office to go to, no late-night presentations to prepare, no endless emails to answer. For the first time in years, her mornings were empty. She sat with a cup of tea by the window, watching the city move without her. It was strange, almost unreal, how life could change so quickly. She had given 7 years of loyalty, and now, in the eyes of her former colleagues, she was branded as careless, even dishonest. That label stung the most. People could call her quiet, or even naive for choosing loyalty over ambition, but dishonest? That was something she could never accept. At first, she thought of walking away completely, leaving the city, starting fresh somewhere no one knew her. But every time she considered it, a voice inside whispered, "Why should you carry the weight of someone else's lies?" Khalid had turned her into a scapegoat to protect himself, and if she walked away silently, then his story would become the only story. So Sarah chose patience. She reminded herself that the truth doesn't need shouting. It only needs time, and the right moment to be seen. Her first step was simple, but important. She opened the folders she had carefully kept over the years. Unlike many people, Sarah had a habit of saving everything. Old receipts, invoices, drafts of financial reports, client contracts with her notes scribbled in the margins. She wasn't obsessive, just organized. And now that organization became her greatest weapon. Night after night, she sorted through papers spread across her dining table. She highlighted patterns, compared old numbers with the final reports that had been presented to the board, and noticed subtle changes. Changes she hadn't made. Someone had altered the records after they passed through her hands. It was clear. The irregularities Khalid had accused her of weren't hers. They were his. But Sarah did not stop at proving her innocence. She wanted to understand why. What was Khalid hiding? Why risk so much to frame her? The answer came as she pieced the timeline together. In the months leading up to her dismissal, the company had been negotiating with new investors. Khalid was eager to show the business as more profitable than it really was. And how better to inflate the numbers than by adjusting financial records? Sarah's detailed work had made it difficult to manipulate, but if he pushed her out and blamed her, he could rewrite the numbers without challenge. It was a cold calculation. He had used her loyalty until it no longer served him, and then cast her aside as a convenient shield. That realization hurt, but it also gave her focus. She knew now what she was dealing with. Not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, but deliberate betrayal. The next step was harder. Proof alone was not enough. She had to find a way for the truth to matter, to reach the people who had the power to see it clearly. Marching into the office with a stack of papers wouldn't work. Khalid was still respected, still admired as a visionary. If she came back angry and demanding, she would be dismissed as bitter or desperate. She needed a strategy as calm as her nature, one that allowed the truth to speak for itself. So Sarah reached out quietly to a few former colleagues she trusted. People who had seen her dedication up close, who remembered the nights she stayed late to save a project. At first they were hesitant. Rumors of her financial carelessness had spread, and doubt had settled in their minds. But when she showed them pieces of her records, emails with timestamps, receipts with signatures, they began to see cracks in Khalid's story. One colleague, a soft-spoken analyst named Farhan, admitted, "I always thought it was strange. The way Khalid dismissed you so quickly. It didn't feel right, but we didn't know what to believe." His words told her something important. People were not blindly loyal to Khalid. They wanted to believe in him, yes, but they also noticed inconsistencies. They just didn't have proof. Sarah provided that missing piece. Meanwhile, Khalid continued to enjoy his growing reputation. Articles praised his leadership. Investors boasted about their partnership with his firm. To the outside world, he was a success story, the image of resilience and intelligence. But inside the company, small doubts were beginning to grow. Numbers still weren't adding up. Projects were delayed despite reported profits, and the quiet whispers in the hallways about Sarah, about the sudden shift in management, were not fading. Sarah never tried to rush. She understood that timing mattered. If she pushed too early, Khalid would dismiss her evidence as the revenge of a bitter former employee. But if she waited until the right cracks appeared, her proof would align with suspicions already forming. People would be ready to listen. So she kept gathering. She collected testimonies, old drafts, even text messages where Khalid had once instructed her to polish numbers for a presentation. She didn't twist them into something they weren't. She simply allowed the truth to stand in its original form. She knew the calm power of authenticity. Months passed. Sarah found small jobs to sustain herself. Temporary accounting work, tutoring students in finance. They weren't glamorous, but they kept her afloat. What mattered more was that her dignity remained intact. She never begged Khalid to take her back. She never tried to publicly smear his name. She waited quietly until the right moment came. And it did, sooner than expected. One evening, Farhan called her. His voice was hushed, almost nervous. "Sarah, something is happening. The board is starting to question Khalid's reports. Investors are pressing him for clearer answers, and he's getting defensive. People are noticing gaps in the numbers again. If you still have what you told me about, now might be the time." Sarah listened, her heartbeat steady. She thanked him, then hung up the phone. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at her table, surrounded by the papers and files that had become her quiet companions. This was it, the moment where patience met opportunity. She didn't imagine herself storming into the office with fury. That wasn't her way. Instead, she pictured something different. A calm presentation, laid out with precision, showing the truth without exaggeration. No anger, no shouting, just facts. Because sometimes the sharpest revenge is not to destroy with noise, but to expose with quiet clarity. The next morning, she prepared her documents into a neat binder. She wrote a letter to the board, professional in tone, simply stating that she wished to provide context on the financial discrepancies for which she had been blamed. She requested a private meeting, offering her records for review. When she delivered the letter, she didn't tremble. She didn't let bitterness creep into her voice. She was calm, polite, measured, just as she had always been. The same qualities Khalid once praised as her strength would now become the very tools of his undoing. As she left the building, she felt a shift inside her. For the first time since that painful morning in Khalid's office, she no longer carried the weight of helplessness. She carried proof, and with it, a quiet confidence. She didn't know exactly how the board would respond, or how Khalid would fight back. But she knew this. She had done her part. The truth was now in the open, placed carefully in the hands of those who mattered. And truth, once released, has a way of finding its mark. Sarah walked home under the evening sky, her steps steady, her expression calm. The story was not over, far from it. The real confrontation had yet to begin. But she was ready, not with rage, but with patience, precision, and proof. Because revenge in her hands was never about anger. It was about reclaiming her dignity with the quiet strength that had always defined her. And Khalid, soon enough, would learn that the loyalty he dismissed so easily could become the calmest, sharpest form of justice. The letter she sent to the board did not go unanswered. Within a week, Sarah received a polite but cautious invitation to meet with the directors in a closed session. The wording was formal, to provide clarification on certain financial matters, but she understood its weight. This was the chance she had prepared for, the moment her years of organization, patience, and quiet strength would meet the truth head-on. On the day of the meeting, she arrived early. She wore a simple navy suit, professional but not flashy. She carried no lawyer, no entourage, no theatrical displays. Only her binder, neatly arranged, every page in order, every record ready. She walked into the boardroom with a steady calm, though her heart was alive with quiet determination. The directors greeted her with courtesy but reserved expressions. Some remembered her years of service, others had only heard Khalid's version of events. But all of them were curious. Why had she requested this meeting months after her departure? And what exactly did she have to say? Sarah began with the same calm tone she had always used in her professional life. She didn't accuse. She didn't dramatize. She simply said, "I worked in this company for 7 years. I was asked to leave under the shadow of financial discrepancies that were said to be my fault. I have lived with that accusation every day since. Today I'm here not to argue, but to show you the records I kept. I believe they tell a different story." She placed the binder on the table, opened it, and began walking them through the evidence. Page by page, she showed the original invoices, the receipts, the early drafts of reports she had submitted. Then she compared them with the altered versions presented later, the versions that had been shown to investors and the board. The changes were clear, the timestamps undeniable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward or push her points aggressively. She let the documents speak for themselves. Every so often, a director asked a question. She answered with clarity, always careful to stick to facts. There was no bitterness in her tone, no hint of personal vendetta, just calm precision. By the end of the session, the room was heavy with silence. The directors exchanged glances, some frowning, some visibly unsettled. One of them finally spoke. "Miss Sarah, are you saying that these irregularities were introduced after your work was submitted?" She met his gaze steadily. "I am not saying anything beyond what the documents show. I did my part, honestly. If changes were made later, that is for you to consider. But I cannot carry responsibility for something I did not do." That restraint impressed them. She wasn't trying to manipulate or dramatize. She was simply placing the truth on the table. After 2 hours, the meeting ended. They thanked her for her time, promised to review the materials, and escorted her out with more warmth than when she had entered. As she walked away from the building, she felt no triumph, no rush of adrenaline, only a quiet release. The weight she had carried for months was no longer hers. She had handed it over to those who could act. Inside the company, however, storm clouds were gathering. The board launched a discreet review of the records, cross-checking Sarah's documents with their own files. It didn't take long before patterns emerged, figures massaged to appear more profitable, contracts reported as closed before they were finalized, expenses shifted into invisible categories. The more they looked, the clearer it became. Sarah had not been careless. She had been silenced. Khalid was summoned for questioning. At first he was confident. He had built his reputation on charm, on the image of a self-made visionary. He believed he could talk his way through any suspicion. But as the board placed Sarah's documents before him, his confidence began to crack. Dates didn't line up. Explanations stumbled. He blamed clerical errors, then miscommunication, then finally implied that perhaps Sarah had manipulated the records herself before leaving. But the directors were no longer convinced. Too many details contradicted his claims. Too many witnesses remembered Sarah's careful habits, her late nights, her steady presence. Slowly, the image of Khalid as the infallible leader began to crumble. Word spread through the company, quietly at first, then openly. Employees whispered in hallways, remembering moments when Sarah had been dismissed too abruptly, when her work had been overshadowed. Some even recalled how she had trained them, guided them, covered for mistakes without seeking credit. In their memories, she was not a fraud. She was the foundation. The board's review turned into a full investigation. Investors grew restless. Questions poured in. And for the first time, Khalid could not hide behind polished speeches or charming interviews. Numbers do not lie forever, and his lies had finally reached their limit. One late evening, Farhan called Sarah again. His voice carried a mixture of awe and relief. "Sarah, it's happening. They're holding Khalid accountable. The board confronted him with the full findings today. He tried to fight, but the evidence was too strong. They're planning to remove him. People are finally realizing what really happened." Sarah listened quietly, her expression soft but steady. She didn't smile widely, didn't cheer. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled. This was never about revenge in the loud sense. It was about restoring truth, clearing her name, reclaiming her dignity. Within weeks, the news broke publicly. Articles that once praised Khalid's visionary leadership now reported on his fall. Headlines spoke of misrepresentation of financial records, loss of investor trust, and leadership scandal. His reputation, the very thing he had tried to protect by sacrificing Sarah, was shattered. The board, eager to stabilize the company's image, reached out to Sarah again. They issued a formal apology, acknowledging her years of dedication and the injustice she had suffered. They even offered her a chance to return, this time in a senior role. But Sarah, calm as ever, declined. She thanked them politely, expressed her gratitude for their acknowledgement, and said, "I gave this company 7 years of my life. I will always value what I learned here, but I have a new path to walk now." It wasn't pride. It wasn't bitterness. It was freedom. She no longer needed the place that had once been her whole world. She had cleared her name, exposed the truth, and reclaimed her dignity. That was enough. In the months that followed, Sarah quietly began a new chapter. She joined a smaller but promising firm, one that valued transparency and collaboration. This time she set clearer boundaries. She still worked with dedication, still carried her calm strength, but she no longer sacrificed everything blindly. She had learned that loyalty must be mutual, that giving endlessly to those who only take is not strength, but self-destruction. And yet, she did not carry bitterness. When people asked about her past, she didn't dwell on betrayal. She simply said, "I worked hard, I learned, and I moved forward." Her story was not one of defeat, but of resilience. As for Khalid, his fall was swift and sharp. Without the false numbers, investors withdrew. Without his polished image, employees left. The company he had once controlled so tightly slipped from his hands. In the end, his greatest fear had come true. The honor he valued more than wealth was gone. Sarah, on the other hand, walked forward with quiet dignity. Her revenge was never loud, never cruel. It was simply the truth, revealed at the right time, with calm patience. That was enough to turn the weight of betrayal into the strength of justice. And so her story became a reminder, not just to those who knew her, but to anyone who listened later, that sometimes the sharpest revenge is not rage or destruction. Sometimes the calm exposure of truth is more powerful than any outburst could ever be. Because in the end, dignity cannot be stolen. It can be hidden, buried under lies for a time, but it will always rise again, quietly, steadily, just as Sarah did. If you found this story meaningful, consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who values calm strength, and subscribing to my Calm Revenge for more stories like this, where justice comes not through anger, but through patience, proof, and quiet resilience.